Well, hello, we're back. This is Mike Barcik.
And my name is Ali Nithawayan.
And welcome to another one of our webinar topics on energy code. This one is about commercial lighting, and it's going to focus mostly on ASHRAE 90.1, but we'll probably see in another webinar what some of the differences are. And it's interesting on lighting, the differences are really more in the way things have been worded, and it ends up having you do very similar things, but it's kind of going about it in different ways. Just as an example, one code says by default we want you to have one switch, but sometimes we want you to have two, and the other one says by default we want you to have two switches, but sometimes we only want you to have one. So it's just kind of different wording, but ultimately it ends up being a similar result. So Ali, I realize a lot of people probably don't know what we look like, so I thought I'd include a picture of us. So that, which one are you? I'm the one with a hat. Okay, so that's how that works. But anyway, so we're going to talk about lighting, and I thought I'd kind of show a picture of this is actually our eco office, and what is significant, Ali, about this in terms of lighting? What do you see in here that's significant?
There's no artificial lighting active in that moment. It's all natural light. And that reflective materials.
You got it. And that's actually often the way it is in that space. This is a very well designed daylit space. These are, of course, south-facing glazing with exterior shading and exterior light shelves, and this is an interior light shelf. So the light can kind of bounce off the light shelf. It almost looks reflective, but it is actually opaque. And the light hits it, it bounces it off the light color ceiling, and you can kick natural daylight deep into the space. And as a result, these lights are turned off. And so that's one of the big things that the energy code is pushing us to do is use more natural daylight in spaces where it makes sense, and then to have any light fixtures that are in what's called the daylit zone, and pretty much everything you see in here is the daylit zone. Those light fixtures have controls to automatically dim them, as you might expect. So that kind of makes sense. And then of course, these are ace-facing glass that in the morning when the sun is hitting them, there are blinds on them that can shade it, but in the afternoon the sun gets overhead and those can just retract or they can open fully. So anyway, kind of a neat thing. We're going to jump up to the basic. I thought I'd throw this in. It kind of we had a lot of interesting things we learned when we were doing research with the Advanced Commercial Building Initiative. And in case I forget to mention it, if you go to southface.org, and then you're good at this, then what do you do?
So on our webpage, and Mike, actually, if you want to end up,
I'll find it here.
Might be easier.
Let me hover back to. I'll go back to the main home page. Okay.
Yeah. So you start off at the main home page, and then you see that education bar on the top.
Yep.
Just kind of hover over it and click on our courses.
Okay.
And from there, that kind of takes you to our list of offerings and topics. And actually, if you expand the energy code section, one of the last ones that you see is the energy code and support documents. And that's where the presentation is going to live. That's where a lot of the resources that you can use out in the field are going to live.
Yep. A great link. And so we want to make sure we're really pushing that out to people you get here. And you can read about the trainings and the outreach. There's a couple videos that are residential. But from the commercial side, probably the big thing you might be interested in is all the slides from the full day presentation are here. And also there's some other good information, mainly the commercial field guide, which is just a tremendous user's guide, pictorial user's guide to how the energy code works. Definitely more fun to read that than the code book. So I'll just say there's some good information here. Take advantage of it, including slides that we're going to look at right now. So thank you for that. I'm going to go back to where I was. So one of the things that we learned as part of some of the research that we involved, this is another section actually of our website. It talks about resources, Advanced Commercial Building Initiative. There's some good tools there too. You know what? We should just show them. Let's just make that up. Yeah. So if you go to a different tab, I'll just do it. Here it's resources, technical resources. And then you scroll down to advanced commercial buildings. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. Case studies and benchmarking tools. And this is the very important one about, what do you do? How do you prepare for some of these upgrades? It's got a really great title on it. But there's also some lighting controls, for example. There's some really good information here. Plug loads, stuff to be aware of that I think would be useful. How to do a small commercial building energy and water assessment. There's a report template. There's a toolkit. Lots of good free information here that's certainly worth looking at. So having said that, I'll take us back to where we were. And I wanted to say some of the things we learned before we dive into the code is that in general, vacancy sensors save more energy than occupancy sensors. I think everybody knows what an occupancy sensor is. You go into a room, it detects you, it turns on the light automatically, you stay and do your thing, and then when you leave, it goes through a timeout session. So maybe 15 minutes later, all the lights automatically shut off. It's auto on, auto off. Well, vacancy sensors are manual on. You walk into the room, nothing happens until you hit the light switch. And once you hit the switch, it turns on and it detects you and it senses you. And as long as you're in the room, it stays on. And when you leave, it goes through a timeout period and then it automatically shuts off. So vacancy sensors save because particularly places like break rooms or conference rooms, somebody may be just passing through. I just want to, walk back in there and grab my pen I left. And if it's an occupancy sensor, the lights kick on and stay on for the whole time. But if it's vacancy sensor, nothing happens unless you make them happen. So particularly in rooms with natural daylight, vacancy sensors absolutely save a lot of energy. Occupancy sensors make sense in spaces that don't have any windows. A bathroom would be a good example where they make sense. So just kind of putting the right control in the right place. Another control capability we like to have is giving people in that room the ability to vary their own light levels. So not just on or off. At a minimum, they want 50%, but sometimes it's nice to have other light levels as well. So it can go all the way up to continuous dimming. Anytime you have a light fixture in a space that has natural daylight, it makes sense to use a photocell. So the photocell can control those light fixtures and dim them down when essentially there's natural daylight. The code is very big on lights being turned off when nobody's there. And so that could be lights being turned off when nobody's there in the room, but also lights automatically turned off in the entire building when no one's in the building. And you can do that in a couple different ways, like from a security system, and we'll see that. And then Ali, do you know this acronym? What is the KISS principle? Do you know what that means?
Keep it simple, stupid.
Keep it simple, stupid. We definitely have seen lighting controls that are so complicated that no one knows how to run them. And those lights tend to be left on, and there's only one person in the whole facility that actually knows how to work them, and they're on vacation. So, and then a degree of verification and functional testing or a crude form of commissioning, basically making sure the controls are hooked up correctly. So that's what we're after. All right. Those are sort of lessons learned and ideas to pay attention to. When you get to the code, basically a couple changes that are in since our old code is one thing, they really want lighting upgrade to happen more times. In the old code, it said if you mess with 50% of the fixtures, you should bring it up to code. Now they're saying 10%. And that's mainly because of LED lighting being so good. So we want the LED lighting opportunity to happen in just about any commercial building. I would say overall, because of LED lighting, the allowable wattage or the lighting power density tables have been reduced. They say on average about 15 to 20%. So there's, sort of some reworking of some of the tables, but concept-wise, no major changes on lighting. And except for more and more need for daylight harvesting, which is, quote, required, prescriptively required in certain types of spaces. Prescriptively required means you could trade it off, but in general, what are you going to trade it with? So you typically In certain spaces, it makes sense to have natural daylight. It makes sense to have light fixtures that automatically, control that. So you showed us a good example a minute ago. All right, what is covered? Lights that are powered through your building, anything that goes through your building. And exceptions are, there's always exceptions under lighting. Emergency lighting that's normally off, life safety requirements. ASHRAE does not regulate dwelling unit lighting. The I code, the international code, does. So it actually says 75% of the light bulbs need to be efficient, but ASHRAE does not look at it. And they've chosen not to regulate decorative glass lighting, gas lighting. So you've got an open flame lighting your building. That's not terribly safe. So don't recommend that too much. In general, the code is laid out a little differently, but we find it easier to explain it by saying, for interior lighting, you're going to create a budget, and that budget is not in dollars, it's in wattage. So you get so many watts to light up the inside of your building. Then you come up with a design, and you can use whatever fixtures you want as long as you do not exceed your budget. You can put 80% of your budget in the front entry, but that means you have only 20% of your budget to light the rest of the building. It's up to you, but you can't exceed your budget. And then the controls, we're going to see there are a bunch of control requirements, and we'll take a look at that in a second. For exterior lighting, it's the same concept. Create a budget, come up with a design that doesn't exceed the budget, and make sure your controls meet the requirements. So that's how we're going to look at it. For interior lighting budget, I always recommend you go to ComCheck, and you can either do, I'll show you the tables and see why you want to go to ComCheck. You can do the building area method, which is one number lookup, or you can do the space by space method, which is you do the same lookup and multiplication times the area for every single room in the building. So building area method, cut to the chase, here's the table. If you are, say, a retail building, you get 1.26 watts per square foot. All retail is created equal under this approach. If you're an office, you get 0.82 watts per square foot. So a 10,000 square foot office would get 8,200 watts. Just for reference, under our previous / current code in 2019, you were allowed 1 watt per square foot for offices. So you can see an 18% reduction on office lighting. And that reflects the available LED technology that's out there. It's a really easy way of doing it. I was just going to show really quick. I think we had ComCheck pulled up. That's ResCheck. Let's go find ComCheck. Right here. And this was a building that we started entering. I moved it to Atlanta. I picked 90.1 as my code. You could also pick the IECC 2015. You pick your path. And this building at the moment is just a retail building. And I'm going to delete that. Just delete that. And it's 8,000 square feet, and there's the 1.26 watts per square foot. So when you go to the lighting tab, you see that's your budget, 10,080. That's the answer. So then you start describing all the fixtures, and we're going to do this, that goes in there. So I'll put some LED light bulbs in there. I don't know. I'm just making up stuff here at this point. But we'll make it a LED. We'll say there's 2, and there are 77 of those light fixtures. And we'll jump down here and say each fixture is rated at 38 watts. And you can see that used up some more of our budget. So we are still well below. We've used up about 73% of our 10,000 watts for our budget. So we have to describe all the light fixtures, but once we're in, as long as we don't exceed the budget, then we're good to go. So that's how that works. The other way so the easy way to get your budget is what I just did. The other way to get your budget is a little more work, but it usually gives you a higher final answer. So for this, it's the same concept, only you got to do it for every time there's a room in the building, every space in the building. And you can often get a higher budget because you're eligible for sort of bonus wattage. So for example, here's a big complicated commercial building, and I'd have to enter each one of these square footages in times the lookup for that type of occupancy. So just, there are tables and tables and tables of this space by space tables, and you just say, okay, for example, a retail sales area is 1.44 watts per square foot, and anyway, if you're using, it depends on what you're selling too. So retail sales area kind of has an additional multiplier. You can also get decorative glazing. You get 1 watt per square foot for like wall sconce lighting, that kind of thing. And you get additional bonus wattage for anywhere from 5 to 30% bonus wattage for better lighting controls. For example, if you're a retail sales area and you have continuous dimming control or programmable multi-level dimming control, and it's manual control, but it's continuous dimming, you can get 10% extra wattage for that particular space. So you get bonus wattage. And then there's also one, each table has this little thing called room cavity ratio threshold. And for example, in an office that's under 2,500 square feet enclosed, I'm sorry, an open office, let me show that one. The room cavity threshold is 4. And if you can show, based on the geometry of your space, that you're greater than 4 on this room cavity ratio calculation, you just plug in the height of the fixture minus the work surface, that's the room cavity height, and then times the ratio of the perimeter of the room times the area of the room. If that number is higher than the threshold, you get 20% bonus. So it's a lot of work, but you can actually pick up, for places that have high ceilings, you get a little extra wattage for those spaces. So let's take a look at that under ComCheck. So here's ComCheck. I'm going to go back to the project, and over here I have to tell it, instead of just saying it's one type of building, it's a retail. I have to go, okay, I'm not going to use the one number lookup. I'm going to go the room by room approach, and we're going to have to do some assigning of all the light fixtures. So just to kind of show you how to do it. So let's say in this retail store, I've got some common spaces types. Oops, let me click on that. Common space. And you can see there's lots and lots of choices, like a corridor or a guest room or a locker area or offices or storage areas, sales area. So we'll pick sales area. And I can say okay. And then, that might be, you can write, main sales area. And you'll scroll down as you, oops, I got to get this to let me see this. There we go. I'll put in the area of that. So maybe out of our 8,000 square foot building, only 6,500 is actual, sales area. And so it'll multiply that number times the 1.44 lookup. So there's my multiplier for the retail sales area. And then I have to put in the other spaces. So you add another space, like, as you can probably imagine, there's probably some corridors, there's some restrooms, there's, seating, whatever's appropriate. So let's put in a restroom just as an example. And I'll say, okay. And this one is maybe, 100 square feet. And you can see its lookup is not as great. It's 0.98. So anyway, you have to go through that and do that for the whole building. And I have not done that for all the building. But then when you click to interior lighting, it calculates the new wattage. And I obviously have not finished, but chances are it would be higher if it was. So in essence, that is how this works. And we're tooling along. The next thing we need to show is how do you I'm going to jump over here and talk about controls. So basically, for your lighting design, you just enter all the fixtures in and follow the rules of how to enter fixtures, and it will calculate and make sure, the key is you want to make sure installed wattage does not exceed your budget. So with that, I'm going to jump down and talk about controls. So I think the people that wrote ASHRAE were trying hard to get people to use appropriate controls in the right location. But I will say this is complicated. And so here it is. I just picked a space, a dining area cafeteria. And what they're saying is the controls for that, you're required to have feature A. You must have either feature B or C. You're required to have D, E, or F. G is not required. And then you need to either have H or I. So these are descriptors of features of controls. And again, I think what they're trying to do is really steer you to use the right type of lighting control in the right kind of space. But I will just acknowledge this is a little bit clunky. So for example, if there's a corridor and all other corridors, you get so many watts per square feet, and you must have feature A, but you don't have to have B, C, D, but you do have to have E or F, and you do have to have G, and you pick H or I. So it's just, again, the way they broke this down, it's a little complicated. So let's look at what each of those features are. A is local control. That's like one light switch in that space. And they have kind of a rule for small spaces that's under 10,000, it's one for every 2,500. For big spaces like a warehouse, it's one for every 10,000. So here's a small space, 8,000 square feet, you would need one for every 2,500, that would be 4. Here's a big space, you would need one for every 10,000, that would be 12,000. So the next part, option or feature B, is the light fixture has to be turned on manually, cannot automatically turn on. Again, there's always going to be exceptions, but this is a manual on room. The switch cannot, you could use a vacancy sensor or you could use a switch. Option C is sometimes given as an alternative, and it says, okay, some of the lights can come on automatically, but no more than half. Okay, that's so B and C, a lot of times you have to pick one or the other. Option D is about giving people the ability to vary the light level. So this makes sense in a multi-purpose room in particular. And they only want at least one halfway point, roughly halfway. It could be a little more than a third or a little less than 2/3. But you could, one old way of doing it is one light switch turns on all the middle bulbs, the other light switch turns on all the outer bulbs, and both light switch ons. So you get sort of 3 levels of light instead of just 2. Option E and F all have to do with controls for automatic daylit light fixtures. So you'll see that in general, and they define what makes it a daylit zone from, say, side lighting is a window. So it comes in basically what they call head height. How tall is the window above the floor? You come in that far. This is the head height until you hit a partition, and then you don't go anymore. And then there's also top lighting, which is overhead lighting. Could be a roof monitor or a skylight. And they have, again, definitions of what makes it a daylit zone. And here's a skylight, and they say, skylight, you basically project the skylight straight down, and you go 70% of the ceiling height in all directions. So if it was 20 feet, you go 14 feet in all directions until you hit something, in this case the exterior wall. So every light fixture in the daylit zone was essentially should be controlled with photocells. Option G, it says people leave that space and within a maximum of 20 minutes, at least half the lights have to automatically shut off. So a corridor would be a good example of that, where if you got an occupancy sensor and nobody's in there, and it's been empty for, let's say, 10 minutes, I'd probably set mine on 10 minutes. Let all those lights go off, or at least half of them. You have to, maybe not all of them, but maybe at least half of them. Okay, And automatic full off is basically saying in a space, when people leave, those lights need to be off. And again, maximum of 20 minutes. And there's a couple of exceptions of places where they think it could be dangerous, or there's always some exceptions. And then finally, scheduled shut off. This is basically saying when the building itself is not occupied, we should shut off the lights. And so you can do this with a building automation system, with a time of day controller. Here's a good one. You leave the building, you arm your security system. Last person out arms it. It knows the building's empty and sends a signal, says shut off all the lights. So that's another way to do it. In general, if you're exempt from sometimes there are certain light fixtures that don't count against your budget, but they still have to have a special switch. So Ali, I don't know if you remember this, but this is from an old department store. Macy's used to be in Atlanta. Do you remember Macy's? Yeah. Well, this is an old photo of, I think I counted, there's 16 halogen light bulbs here just cooking these t-shirts. And it was an old photo, but it really gives you a sense of how much energy is wasted for this very, halogen and lights is just horrible. So today with LED, we can just get that same light and same look for a fraction of the wattage. And of course, Ali, besides, putting out light that's much more efficient, what's the thing that they don't put out? What do the LEDs not put out that the halogens really put out?
Heat.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, so anyway, all right, switching gears, exterior lighting, we're gonna wrap up and just say it's the same concept. You figure out your budget. You figure out where you're building. Most of the time in ASHRAE, you're building what's called Zone 3. Unless you're a very high density downtown commercial district. Most commercial buildings are Zone 3. Zone 2 is residential. Zone 1 is the parking lot of a state park or a national park. And Zone 0 is the woods in the park. So, so I don't know why they have that on there, but it's kind of funny. So they often have exempt outdoor lightings, like you'd see. There's an exempt indoor lighting list as well. Certain lights are just sort of more process lighting. So often these have to have their own switch. Okay, the only difference here between outdoor and indoor is that the outdoor lighting is got what's called a tradable chart and a non-tradable. Tradable means you come up with your budget, you can use your light fixtures however you want to. You can put them anywhere you want to. You get a 750 watt signing bonus, and then you get 0.1 watts per square foot for your parking area. And then you get some for your building entrance and things like that. So once you come up with your budget, you just put your light fixtures wherever you want. The other thing is called non-tradable, and we usually call this feature lighting. So if you are, for example, in Zone 3 and you want to light up your building, the face of your building, you get 0.15 watts per square foot. But you have to use it there, or you can't sort of take that wattage and put it out in the parking lot. It's either use it or lose it. And then finally, controls, basically pretty much what you'd expect. The lights need to be off for outdoors during the daytime. And a photocell time clock can help you. This is new though, curfew hours. They want you by default at midnight, but you can adjust the times. But they want you to sort of say, we're gonna come on at night with our normal brightness, and then at midnight, we're gonna reduce it for curfew levels of lighting, and you gotta reduce it at least 30%. So you can do this in a number of ways, but ultimately they're saying, late in the night, we don't need to have the full bright. So that's the option. And again, there's always exceptions. Not going to talk about, parking garages kind of have their own control requirements. The last big thing is they want the lights and the controls to be proven with some functional testing. And that's, I think, a key element. Just to make sure the occupancy sensors or vacancy sensors are picking up people where they should. You want to be sitting in a bathroom and all the lights go out. You're trying to wave your hands, that kind of thing. How many times has that happened to us? Yeah. Not at the same time. Yeah. So yeah, we don't want that. And that's basically it in terms of ASHRAE. They want submittals within 90 days and so on. But again, I always go back to use ComCheck. It is your friend. And if you're trying to use ComCheck, for example, for exterior lighting, see if I can find that. You go to the, you probably have to, let's see, I haven't done this in a while. We have to tell it what sort of exterior lighting we're going to do on this main screen, and it'll come up with our budget, and then we have to kind of essentially fill it in on this screen. So it's very similar to the other approach. So with that, that is a quick summary of the basics of lighting. And again, I can't emphasize it enough. ComCheck is your friend. It does all the math. It has all the tables built in. It is free. And it does a nice printout that sort of shows you what your budget is, how you didn't exceed your budget. It creates a lighting schedule. It's definitely the way to go. So with that, Ali,
We're good.
feeling good? That's going to wrap us on commercial lighting. Thank you.